After well over 70 hours of play, I have finally finished the first part of this series, and I'm ready to give you my verdict, my final thoughts on The Witcher Enhanced Edition. For those of you that do not know, The Witcher is a game about a character called Geralt of Rivia, who is a witcher. And witchers are professional monster hunters. The world of The Witcher is a very dark place. It is extremely dangerous. It is extremely hard to live there, and monsters are everywhere. And of course, the people need protecting from those monsters, and that is where you come in. But witchers are not just highly trained people who go off and hunt monsters. They are actually mutants. They have been trained since birth. They have had training in fighting, in magic, in alchemy, and they have been mutated using these mutagens into the ultimate fighting machine. They are faster, stronger, they have more endurance, they heal faster, and they can drink potions that would kill a normal man, and these potions give them an even greater edge in the fight against their foes. And whilst you might think that these witchers, these supermen who protect the people of the land, would be heralded as heroes, I'm afraid nothing could be further from the truth. They are generally mistrusted, disliked, and oftentimes completely hated. And in fact, the game starts with the witchers in a pretty bad state. There are not many of them left. There have been uprisings against them. People have hunted them down and killed them. And in fact, the game itself starts with a battle in the witchers' home base, where bandits or some group have come to attack them, kill them, and perhaps steal their secrets. The world of The Witcher is actually a very, very deep place. It superficially looks like a sort of medieval European nation. It has that kind of feel. It's very dirty, very dark. There is a very feudal hierarchy. There are, peasants, commoners, there are lords and nobles and knights in between. But it also has many of the trappings of standard high fantasy worlds. So, for example, elves, dwarves, gnomes, they exist in this world, although perhaps not in the same shining way they exist in games like The Elder Scrolls or stories such as Lord of the Rings. In this world, non-human races have been beaten, they've been defeated, and they live in ghettos in the human cities. They are heavily oppressed, treated very badly indeed, and live a life worse than the lowest peasant of the human race, which is pretty bad. There are even some elves and dwarves and non-humans who are fighting back, the Scoia'tael, and they are freedom fighters in their own words, or terrorists in the words of the human overlords. So if you were expecting the beautiful, lofty, noble high elves of Lothlorien in this game, I'm afraid you're going to be very disappointed, although they do share the Celtic vibe of the Lord of the Rings elves. In fact, there is a lot of that in the game. There is a lot of influence from the various mythologies of Europe. You will see references to things like King Arthur, the Lady of the Lake with the sword coming out of the water, that type of thing. And it's all woven together in this very detailed and rich tapestry, this very, very well-defined background lore. This is one of those games where you really should read a lot of the books and ask the characters you meet to tell their stories. They're often fascinating, and sometimes they will actually help you. Now, if you're wondering why a first game in a series would have such detailed lore, it is simply because this game was actually based upon a series of books, a series of Polish books, and so it had a lot of material to draw on. Of course, this did pose the problem of you playing a character who knows nothing about this lore if you've not read the books, and so the inevitable cliche of you have lost your memory. You start the game, they find you, you were presumed dead, and you don't remember a damned thing, and so you have every excuse to not know anything about this land, and thus you are encouraged to actually interact with the NPCs, read the books, and actually find out what is going on. Now, this is a fantasy game. As I've said, there are plenty of fantasy trappings, but in many ways this game felt more like a post-apocalyptic game to me. It really has a very dark, gritty, and not necessarily inviting presence to it superficially. You will find yourself really struggling with a lot of moral issues. There is no clear-cut bad guy. There are no noble causes. No matter how hard you search for them, they might seem that way to some people, but once you scratch the surface, it's very much a civilization filled to the brim with people just trying to survive. Oh, there are some that flourish, and they usually are bad guys, unfortunately. There is the occasional character where you think, no, he's noble, or he's trying to do some good, but even then, normally through brutal means that are morally grey, to say the least. This is one of those games where you will play, you will do things, but you will constantly question whether you did the right thing, and quite possibly never ever figure it out. But I wouldn't say it was a miserable place in its entirety. There are plenty of characters you meet who are happy, fun, entertaining. There are some characters who really are good people. You will meet one or two who genuinely are trying to make a difference in the world, in the lives of others, for the better. But it is, I'm afraid, a line that you, as a Witcher, are going to be really going backwards and forwards across. You can try your best to be a hero, but whether you manage that, well, let's just say my opinion for my playthrough was I did my best. I really did. The game, though, actually really does seem to react to what you try to do. If you join one side or the other, the game definitely makes it feel like you have changed the outcome. It makes it feel like you have had an influence for the better or for the worse, or usually for both. And I have to say that is one of the things that makes this game truly great. It really invests you in its development. You really do feel like you were there and you had to make those tough choices, and that they made a difference, that people did get affected by your actions. And it brings you face to face with a lot of moral issues, and really moral issues that are not even black and white, where you're having to judge people who honestly believe they are doing the right thing, they are doing what humanity needs, when in fact they seem to be a true monster. More a monster than any undead that you will fight. And that's an incredible thing for a game to do. But it's not all smiles, I'm afraid. Whilst this game has so many things going for it, it also has many, many flaws. Now, it is an old game. It was published, I believe, in 2007, so many of the things are to be expected. I mean, games that were made back then lack some of the features you would expect from a game that was released now, but there are still many things that will frustrate you. For example, the combat. The combat is not complicated and it is not difficult, but it's clumsy. It will take a little time to get used to, but once you do, you'll find it pretty easy to fight. But there's not much you can do. Even on the toughest difficulties, you will do the same things. You probably won't be doing much dodging and rolling or coming up with complex tactics. It's all about timing the mouse clicks on the opponent at the right time and perhaps using the right sign. As I said, it's not hard, it's not complicated, it just feels quite clumsy. And I mean, I played in over-the-shoulder mode. You can actually play in isometric mode, but I liked over-the-shoulder mode. It felt more personal and more in with the action. But as a combat game, it didn't work for me. I mean, the story and everything else around it, brilliant. But the combat, if the game had to rely on the combat, I probably would not be recommending it. And probably my other major criticism would be the dialogue. The voice acting was well, it wasn't that it was bad. The individual voice actors were probably pretty good, but the voice acting, at least the English translation, when put together, didn't quite match the situation always, or sometimes the tone would be wrong between sentences. There was just something a little off about the whole thing. So apparently it's a lot better in Polish, and I can believe that. But there were other little things like occasionally you'd be talking to an NPC and his voice would change from one line to another, which is extremely, extremely weird. And it wasn't always obvious which dialogue option was going to be said in what way. So you'd pick an option thinking, okay, this is a friendly refusal, but when it came out of your mouth, it was an aggressive, insulting, belligerent statement. And you were like, no, I didn't mean that. No, that's not quite what I wanted to say. And this was compounded by the fact that you'd say one sentence, but then it would trigger a line of dialogue where the character would then say 5 or 6 more sentences that perhaps you really didn't want to say. So you learned to be very, very careful of which options you were selecting in the dialogue. And there were some minor issues. For example, the inventory, which was very old school inventory, but it was ridiculously simple. There was you didn't have, you could only wear armor and put swords in sword slots. You couldn't put them in your backpack or anything like that, which is not a problem, but the things you could put in your backpack were just a jumbled mess in a tiny little square. But no apparent reason. You've got an entire screen that they could have used for that backpack, where you could have had nice large icons so you could have easily seen things, and it was all squished into this tiny little box, and it was very easy to miss things. So, I mean, it wasn't the worst inventory system ever, but it just seemed to not use the available space or do it in a good manner. And there did seem to be a lot of things in the inventory that you really never needed. There were 5 weapon slots. You had your Witcher sword, a steel sword, and then 3 other slots for random weapons. And honestly, I don't know if any of those weapons are any good because I never tried using them. They might actually be better than the weapons I was using, but the game does not seem to promote using them very much. Perhaps it's the sort of thing you use on a second playthrough, but the game only gives you steel sword skills and silver sword skills, and so you naturally use those particular weapons, and if you have an axe on your belt, you just kind of ignore it. I did use a torch once to kill something, which was pretty good, but there seems to have been a wasted opportunity there. So it almost feels like it was an idea they had, but then they never went far enough with it. And the same is true of the potions. Alchemy is a big part of the game, The Witcher, and of the books, I believe. And it's pretty cool. It's done really, really well. It's reasonably complicated. You brew your potions and then never use them. No, that's not true. You use them, but you use the same ones over and over and over and over again. I pretty much did the entire game with the Swallow potion, which regenerated health, the Tawny Owl potion, which regenerated stamina and endurance, and the Cat potion, which allows you to see in the dark. There were plenty of other potions, there were a load of potions, but you generally didn't use them. You didn't want to drink too many potions because they had a toxic effect, and you would need to meditate to get rid of that toxic effect, and then you would lose the effect of the potion. So you picked your potions carefully. And those 3 potions are just the ones that were overall the most useful for just about 99% of the game. There was the occasional fight where you would think, right, I know I'm going to be poisoned or something. Or perhaps you'd be in a very tough boss fight and you'd think, alright, I'm bleeding, I should use a potion that makes me resist bleeding. But not often. That just did not happen very often. I had potions that would make my blood poisonous to vampires, so if they bit me in the neck and drained my blood, it would hurt them. I never used it. I brewed one, but then never used it because vampires were not a problem. The various different vampires, I think I only ever got drained once, and it was when I first met vampires. So I just didn't really use them. There were so many potions. So I felt like they'd come up with a great alchemy system, and perhaps the same with the weapons, a great weapon system, and then never really gave you an incentive to actually use them, which seemed to be a wasted opportunity. There were lots of little things like this. One of the things that infuriated me was every time I went into a cutscene, into a conversation, I would put my sword away. And you'd walk up to 5 or 6 bandits who were beating someone up, and you're going to fight them, and you put your sword away, and then the conversation would finish inevitably with you being attacked by them, and there'd be 6 of them, and they'd all be hitting you and stabbing you, and you'd be stood there, and it was so infuriating. I just kept wanting to scream, no, keep your sword in hand the whole time. So it's little things like this that just felt like they just didn't polish it right. They didn't smooth off the rough edges, and they kept coming up, and they kept infuriating you just a little bit. And I have to say, on a lesser game, it would have destroyed the game for me. It probably would have made me not finish it. In fact, I'd already tried The Witcher very briefly early on, many years ago, and the clumsiness of the interface did sort of make me not really want to carry on. I had plenty of other things going on, so I was playing a lot of other games, and The Witcher just fell by the wayside because of its clumsy nature. And I only took it up again when people really just said, no, you should try this. It has got such a great story, such a rich set of lore. You've got to get past it. Get past the clumsy nature and experience this game. And I'm glad they did. And I'm glad they did, because The Witcher is a phenomenal game. It is, in spite of its many flaws, it is an epic game. It's a classic. It is one of those games that I will now consider to be a true classic. It is akin to a great story that unfortunately was told by somebody who didn't have natural storytelling skills, but was showing signs of being a great storyteller one day. I don't know what was going through the minds of the people who made this game, but I got the feeling that this was a game they wanted to make, not because they wanted to make a game, but because they loved The Witcher, and they wanted to make a Witcher game. And at least that's how it feels to me. This feels like a labour of love. It feels like somebody's dream was to make this game, and they went off and did it. And I really enjoyed this. I mean, I wouldn't say I enjoyed every minute. There were frustrating minutes, but overall, in the over 70 hours I have spent in this game, I have enjoyed it thoroughly, and will consider it one of my top games. I really will. For all of its flaws, this game is quite high up in my rank of must-have games. Games you should play if you're an RPG fan, a fantasy fan, or a fan of deep but dark stories. And I can tell you, I've already started playing the second game, and many of the problems I had with the first have been fixed. So it shows that these guys know what they did wrong and are approaching it for future titles. But don't let that put you off trying the first game. If you're new to The Witcher as I was, and you were thinking, oh, I'd like to try. Maybe I should go straight for number 2, number 3. I do understand, and if you are not patient, that might be the best solution. But just know you are missing out on an incredible experience. And if you do that, you really should do a lot of reading or watch someone else do a Let's Play. I've done one, I will link it down below, and find out what went on in that game, because it will give you, well, it will give you a connection to this world and to the people in it. And I think in this game, in this series of games, that connection is all important. That's what this game is. It's personal. It's important to you. It means something. And that is an incredible feeling. In the end, my verdict on this game is absolutely brilliant. Flawed and occasionally frustrating, but nonetheless truly brilliant.